Okay, did you go through your textbook? Did you read the portions that I told you?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Okay, so we'll begin today's class. Before that, let me ask what we dealt with in the last class. Who can tell me? Amal, can you tell me what we dealt with in the last class?
We said,
Yeah, please be louder.
ma'am, we studied that psychology,
As a discipline
natural sciences,
and
social
natural
science.
science and social science. Did you all read the story that I told you to? Did you read till page number 5, everybody?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Did you understand the story? Who can tell me what the story was? Who is a good storyteller here? Come on, it's just a small story. Tell me. Who's here, Reina? Can you tell me? Or who is it? Aishwarya, can you tell me what the story was about?
This was a story about two girls. One girl's family background was totally different from the other. One was
Yes.
living with all the members of the family, whereas the other one was living with only her mother, I guess.
Yes. Okay. And what
Then
happened?
during the flood time, the
Yes.
one living with the mother was quite rich. So
Okay.
they was affected by the flood and
Okay.
she had to change their place,
House. Yes.
house. Yeah.
Residence. Then.
So she stayed with her friend who was quite poor,
Okay.
and then she had a change in her behavior. Like she began to interact with many people
Yes. And
of their family, and
so why did we learn or why did we read that story? To understand how the social context influences the people behavior. Amal, Ashish and all, please switch on your videos. Who else? Who else? Ashish, Amal, please switch on your videos. So, in the previous classes, we learned the definitions. We learned how psychology is a discipline. We learned about psychology as a social science and also as a natural science. Today, the topic that we are going to deal with is understanding mind and behavior. Can you see the screen?
yes,
Can you see
ma'am.
the presentation? Yes. Okay, fine. Here, initially we saw a definition where psychology was considered as a study of what? Study of?
Mental processes, experience, and behavior.
Okay, that's right. But before that, initially we saw the Greek origin. With that, we concluded that psychology was a study of soul
Mind
or
and soul.
mind and
Mind and
soul.
soul.
Yes, exactly. So that was still a controversy then. During those times, people had different opinions on what mind is. Does mind exist or where is it located? We all discussed about that, right? And still there is some controversy or debate about the topic. And then it is based on this that we have come to a conclusion now. It is true that mind cannot exist without brain, but mind is a separate entity. What do you mean by entity? It is a separate element. So, in this statement, this is a statement from your textbook. Okay. In that, it is given, it is true that mind cannot exist without brain. So, mind cannot exist without brain, which means mind is not possible without brain. That's how this statement explains. But still, mind has a separate entity. Means it is not necessary that mind is located inside the brain. The mind has a separate existence in itself. Okay. It is separate from the brain, also interrelated to the brain. Understood? To prove this particular sentence, we see some cases today. We see some examples or we see some incidents today. Here, in all these incidents or examples, what we have to notice, some part of the brain or some part of the body part is damaged or injured in some or the other way. But the mind remained intact. That is what we are going to see in the upcoming cases. Okay. So here is the first case, occipital lobe removal. Okay, please note down these terms which you are not familiar with. Occipital lobe removal. You have to copy down that in your lecture notes. Okay. Yes. Do you know what a lobe is? Anybody? Have you studied about brain lobes? Lobes of the brain? No. Okay. Lobe essentially means any projection of the body part. Okay. You have brain lobes, you have ear lobes and different structures like that. So here we deal with brain lobes, and occipital lobe is one of the brain lobe. We have 4 brain lobes. In this picture it is clear. The red part is called the frontal lobe. The yellow one is the parietal lobe. The violet one is the occipital lobe, and the greenish color, it is the temporal lobe. All these lobes function together to carry out all the brain activities, but they also have some of the specified functions. Okay, and occipital lobe is the one responsible for vision. Information processing regarding vision is done by the occipital lobe. There are different parts of the brain in the occipital lobe, but that particular part of the brain, the 2 hemispheres, the left and the right hemispheres, we have parts of occipital lobe. It is in this part that we have the primary visual cortex. Write down primary visual cortex. This primary visual cortex is the one responsible for interpreting incoming visual information. So when you see any object, when you see a dog, you see, you get the visual information, you get the sensation, and you have to understand that it is a dog. Okay, so that information is processed in the primary visual cortex of the occipital lobe. And occipital lobe is located at the very back area of the brain. So when occipital lobe was surgically removed, this is the case we are talking about. When occipital lobe was surgically removed, the patients responded correctly to location and configuration of visual cues. So what this case tells about is, there were some of the patients who had some brain damage, and the occipital part of the brain or the occipital lobe of the brain was removed surgically. Okay. And so when occipital lobe was removed, what do we expect from them? We expect that their visual information is not processed properly, right? Because that was the lobe responsible for processing visual information. But what happened in contrast to your expectation was that they could respond correctly to location and configuration of visual cues, which means that if suppose they were walking down a stairs, or if they were walking through our classroom, they didn't stumble, they didn't go and hit the wall, but they could manage somehow. They could relate to those location cues and they could walk properly, which means some of the part of the brain was damaged, but still the mind, their earlier mental process and all remained intact. Their mind helped them to manage the situation. Okay, shall we move on to the next one? Unmute and tell me, shall we?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Next one is a phenomenon called phantom arm. We also call phantom limb. Note down, okay, note down these terms. Okay, in this case, before that, let me tell what a phantom arm is. Phantom means something that is not real. We also explain it in terms of ghost and spirits, but that's not the meaning we are referring to here. Here we have the meaning. Phantom arm means the arm which is not real. Okay. Here, an athlete lost his arm in a motorcycle accident but continued to feel an arm and also continued to feel its movements. When offered coffee, his phantom arm reached out to the coffee cup, and when someone pulled it away, he protested. Okay, so the case is there was an athlete. He met with an accident, a motorcycle accident, and what happened is he injured his arm so badly that they had to amputate his arm. Means they had to remove his arm. Somehow it was injured, and what happened is he could still feel his arm even after the amputation, even after the removal of the arm part of his body. He could feel it. He could feel the movements also. So when somebody offers him a coffee, he usually used to pull his arm forward. Similarly, after the amputation also, he did the same. And people tried to convince him that he doesn't have an arm anymore. But what he did is he refused all that. He still continued to feel that. And phantom pain is something similar to the same concept. But what happens in phantom pain is they feel pain in an amputated arm or a limb. Okay? There won't be a real arm or a real limb or a real body part, but still they feel a pain in that part. That is what phantom pain is known as. Okay, and again, this also proves the fact that the mind was still intact in them. That's why he could feel its movements, feel the arm that he lost already. Okay, and the next one we have brain injury. A young man who suffered brain injury in an accident after he returned home from the hospital claimed that his parents had been replaced by their duplicates. They were considered as imposters. So, another person met with an accident. He had severe brain damage, and what he did is his parents came to meet him, but he told that they were all duplicates. They were all imposters. Imposters means someone who lives in false identities to cheat people. So he thought that they were some of the imposters who have come to do some fraud activity at his home. That's what happened. Here also, there was some damage to the brain, but his mind was intact. He had some memories of his parents, and he was telling that they are not his parents anymore. Again, psychological problems occur to people after accidents, brain damages occur, and these are some of the after effects that people have after accidents. Okay, and the next one. Okay, yeah, that's it. Those three cases we discussed right now, they were the ones to prove that mind has a separate entity. Mind has a separate existence from brain. Although our mental processes are and neural activities in the brain are closely related, the mind still has a separate entity. For that, we discussed three cases. Okay, we're going to move on to next subtopic, which is relationship between mind and the body. Okay. Again, yesterday we spoke about a person, Rene Descartes. He put forward the idea of dualism. Please note down dualism. D-U-A-L-I-S-M. Dualism. Dualism of mind and body. He told that mind and body has separate existence. Okay, they are two different entities. That's what he put forward. Okay. Now, earlier it was thought that there is no... Do you have any doubt? I can hear some voices. Okay. Earlier it was thought that there is no relationship between them. They were thought to be parallel to each other, and recent studies show that this is not the case. So, mind and body was thought to be parallel to each other. Have you studied parallel lines? Grishma, have you studied about parallel lines in mathematics? Yes, and parallel lines and intersecting lines. Intersecting lines have common points, but parallel lines do not meet, right? So, mind and body was compared to parallel lines. Yes, parallel lines do not have a common point, which means that mind and body did not have any common factors. They did not meet any common criteria. They did not have any common characteristic. So, earlier, initially, that was the viewpoint of people about mind and the body. But now, recent studies, recent researches, advancement in science and technology has proved that mind and body has some or the other relation to each other. They are interdependent. They have some or the other relation with each other. So in order to prove that, we see some concepts in psychology. Okay. Earlier, the ones that we saw was to prove that mind is a separate entity. Now we are going to see the cases to know the relationship between the mind and the body. Is that clear? Yes?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. So the first one is affective neuroscience. Please write down what this is. Affective neuroscience is a study of the neural mechanisms of emotions. Okay, affective neuroscience. It is evident from that term. Affective means something that deals with the emotions, feelings, and moods of the person. And neuroscience, as we said in the first class, neuroscience deals with the neural activities, science of the neural activities or the brain activities. So, it is a study of neural mechanisms of emotions. Now, there are different studies, different researches taking place in affective neuroscience. And what the studies showed was that there is a relationship between mind and behavior. We'll see how. Positive visualization techniques and feeling positive emotions can bring about significant changes in the bodily processes. Positive visualization means we visualize or we imagine or we try to see something that is positive in nature, which is positive for us, which makes us happy, which makes us relaxed. That is positive visualization techniques. And feeling positive emotions. Which are the positive emotions? Happiness, excitement, and all. Those are the positive emotions. So, positive visualization techniques, along with feeling positive emotions, can bring about significant changes in the bodily processes. To understand this, I'll tell you an example. Have you watched the movie Bangalore Days?
Yes.
Yes. And Nivin Pauli's mother engages in laughter therapy. It was quite viral during those times. Have you seen that?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes. That is one of the common example to explain this. When a person is very stressed, when a person is very anxious, when a person is having so much of tensions, their body will be having many physiological or biological reactions. Heart pounds very fast, they sweat, their knees tremble, they feel the muscles are twitching, and all these reactions are dealt with through these positive visualization techniques or positive make them to feel positive emotions. So laughter therapy, through this, through voluntarily laughing, means it's induced. We make them to laugh more and more so that their bodily processes calm down. They become balanced in nature so that their stress and all is reduced. Understood? So that is what affective neuroscience studies shows. Positive visualization and feeling positive emotions. That is what is important here. Now, next one. Similarly, a case of positive visualization. This was very famous. Dean Ornish. This picture is of Dean Ornish, who was an American physician and researcher. He is still alive. He is also doing several researches and scientific studies based on this right now. And one of the famous studies was this. A person with blocked arteries was made to visualize that blood was flowing through her or his blocked arteries. So you know what an artery is, right? The blood vessel that carries what blood? Oxygenated or deoxygenated blood? Okay. It is the blood vessel that carries oxygenated blood, which is the pure blood. Okay. Here, the arteries of the heart, they were blocked somehow because of heart diseases, and the patients, they were made to visualize that blood is flowing through their arteries smoothly. Like the positive visualizations that we discussed earlier, they were supposed to imagine that they are having a smooth flow of blood in their arteries. And through subsequent training, through subsequent sessions, what they found is that finally significant relief was obtained by these patients as the degree of blockage became significantly less. So after many sessions of these positive visualization, of these imagining techniques, what they found as a result is the blockage in the arteries reduced to a significant level. That is also a finding to understand that there is a relationship between mind and the body. Okay. Next one is mental imagery. Mental imagery, please note that, refers to the images generated by a person in his or her mind. Mental imagery refers to the images generated by a person in his or her mind. So we all do imagine things in daily life, right? All those comes under mental imagery. When we imagine things in our mind, they all fall in the category of mental imagery. They have been used to cure various kinds of phobias. This is one case that we are discussing here, specifically to phobias. What are phobias? Irrational fears of objects and situations. Irrational fears are different from the normal fears. So, who is going to tell me? Raina, tell me, what is your biggest fear?
Heights.
Heights. You're feared of heights, or are you phobic about heights?
Very phobic.
Very phobic. Very phobic in the sense we give irrational, we fear in an illogical way towards those objects and situations. Okay, I'll give you an example here. Arachnophobia. Arachnophobia is the fear of spiders or the fear of arachnids like scorpions and all. Okay, suppose imagine that I am arachnophobic in nature. I am feared of spiders. Okay, and when I enter a library room, I open a book, and it was a book based on science. Okay, and in one of the pages, I saw the picture of a spider. I throw the book away. I scream out loud. I run out of the room. I run out of the whole library, and I never come back again. That's what phobic people do. It is just a picture. It is not going to hurt me in any way, but I imagine that somehow the spider may come and attack me. Somehow the spider might pop up from the book and attack me. It might hurt me in some way, so I don't want to take any risks, so I just flew away. That's what phobic people do. They are irrational fears. It's not like the fears that we usually have. Usually, suddenly when we encounter a spider, of course we are shocked, we scream aloud. Yes, usually people do that, but that is normal response, normal stress reaction. That is a normal stress humanly reaction that we have. But these are irrational fears. We can't give any logic reasons to these fears. Such fears are called phobias. We'll deal with phobias in upcoming chapters, but understand this topic. Okay. So for treating phobias, there are several therapies to treat phobias, but mental imagery is one of the main or one of the important technique used to treat phobias. Here what we do is, we ask the person who is phobic of spiders to imagine themselves encountering a situation with spiders, or just imagine a spider to explain its features, imagine what color it is, and that itself makes the person discomfortable. But by subsequent reactions, by subsequent techniques or subsequent sessions, we teach them how to deal with those discomfort feelings. Okay, so here also we see how mind and the body is related. Through this imagery, through the use of mental imagery, we can learn how the mind or the mental processes are influencing our behavior. Here we are dealing with phobic behaviors in this particular case. Okay, understood? Okay. Next is psychoneuroimmunology. Again, note this is a new term for you. It is the study of the interaction between psychological processes and the nervous and immune systems of the human body. As the name suggests, psycho part stands for the psychological processes. Then the neuro part stands for the nervous system. And the immuno part stands for the immune system. So we have a psychological system, nervous system, as well as an immune system of the human body. The study of the interactions between these systems is known as psychoneuroimmunology. Okay, this emphasizes the role played by the mind in strengthening the immune system. So how psychological processes are influenced by the nervous system or the nervous activities, or how psychological process can influence the immune system of the human body, how immune system can in turn affect the nervous system or the psychological processes. All these are dealt with in the psychoneuroimmunology. It is also known as psychoendoneuroimmunology. We have a new addition word, that is endo. Endo stands for the endocrine system in our body. Have you studied about endocrine system?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes. What are the secretions of the endocrine systems called? Not familiar. Hormones. Have you heard about them? Okay. Endocrine glands are the ductless glands in our body which secrete different hormones. Okay. These hormones also have a role in the psychological processes. So all these processes, all these interactions are dealt with in psychoneuroimmunology. This particular field of study deals with all the interactions. Okay. And to understand how psychoneuroimmunology also deals with the relationship between mind and behavior, I'll tell you an example. Have you heard about exam fever?
Yes, ma'am.
How many of you have exam fever? Put your hands up. Or how many of you have had exam fever? Nobody. Okay. So, people are starting to put their hands up slowly. Okay, whatever it is. We all have had those experiences. When our exams are near, we tend to have increased appetite or maybe low appetite, increased sleep or low sleep. We can't think of the day we are going to start the exams. We somehow want it to get over. Some of them get fever. Our immune system goes very low. We get fever, we get cold, we get sneeze, and you tell your mom, "Mama, I don't want to go to school today. I'm not doing well. I don't think I have the strength to go and write the exams. I'm having headache. I'm having this. I'm having that." Haven't you all experienced the same thing? At least at some point in life, everybody has experienced this. So that is a valid evidence that our psychological processes and the immune system or the nervous system are connected. Okay, when we think of the exams, when we think of the fear of exams, our immune system goes down, right? We get fever. That is an evidence that psychological processes can influence the immune system. So we saw 4 cases here: affective neuroscience, Dean Ornish case, which was regarding the blocked arteries. Then we saw the mental imagery, and the example that we saw was about the phobias, specifically arachnophobia. Then we dealt with psychoneuroimmunology. Why did we deal with the 4 cases? To understand the relationship between what? Elvina, tell me, between?
Mind and body.
Mind and body, correct. Next. So everything clear as of now? Shall we move on? Okay. Next is popular notions about psychology as a discipline. So in the initial classes, we told we don't know what psychology really is. You have different expectations about psychology. Who Amal told me that he wants to learn mentalism. He's interested in that. Somebody wants to learn a new topic. We discussed all that, right? Here, most of us act like a psychologist, or most of us have acted like a psychologist. We all have tried to understand why someone behaved in a certain manner. Most of us have developed our own theory of human behavior based on common sense, right? We all have one major or one famous psychologist at home whom we call mother. When we sit gloomy, when we are very bored, or when our face expression changes, our mothers or any of our parents or our elders come to us and ask us, what happened? There is something wrong in you, right? Or maybe our friends come and ask us. They try to console us, they try to support us, they try to advise us, they give us small miniature counseling sessions. We also do the same, right? So we all have acted like a psychologist at some or the other point of life. But have we gained any professional experience or professional training in it? No. We have just did all those based on common sense, like common sense and the experiences in our life. They have taught us how to behave to people, right? So here, common sense refers mainly to a set of beliefs and skills that are shared by most people but acquired through no specialist education. As I told before, we didn't get any, or we didn't acquire any specific education in explaining the psychological process or explaining why a person is sad. But we did it, right? That was purely based on common sense. So such explanations may be biased or contain other forms of errors. Why? Why is it biased? Because we haven't followed the scientific method. Last class we discussed about the scientific method and all, right? The hypothetical deductive model, and that we form theories, hypotheses and all. But we usually don't do that when we are in the case of common sense, right? So in this, how psychology is different from common sense is that psychology uses scientific methods systematically means through different steps, through different organizing different things. The psychology or the field of psychology deals with it or a problem or a problem situation in a very scientific manner. But common sense does not do that. Okay. So in order to prove that psychology is not common sense, we have a study here. This is given in your textbook. It is known as Dweck's study. Please note, Dweck's study, which was conducted in the year 1975. So Dweck was interested in knowing why certain number of students gave up easily. When they face any problem in life, they just give up easily. They don't try anymore. Okay. And what she did is she took a set of students, she divided them into two groups, group 1 and group 2, and she gave training for them for 25 days in solving mathematics problems. Okay, is it clear? Group 1 and group 2, there were 25 days training and they were supposed to solve maths problems. And we'll see what happened. In group 1, they were given easy problems. Okay, and they solved these easy problems. Since it was easy problems, they could solve each and every problem that they got. And in group 2, they were given in a mixed fashion. Easy and difficult ones were given, but the difficult problems they were not able to solve. That's what happened in the group 2. So in group 1, everybody solved each and every problem, but in group 2, they solved the easy problems, but the difficult ones they could not solve. So what Dweck did is she asked them to solve it once more. She asked them to persuade themselves in trying to solve the problems again and again. And she somehow managed to convince that they couldn't solve the problem because they are not trying. So they understood that they are not trying, and that's why they could not solve the problem. That's what happened in group 2. Okay, group 1 went on easily because they got easy problems, they could solve each and every problem, but the complex thing happened in the group 2. Now, in common sense, what do we expect? We expect everyone to easily give up, right? But what happened here is when Dweck persuaded group 2 to put in more effort, the result after the 20 days came, 25 days came, and the new set of questions were given. Apart from the questions that Dweck already gave them, she gave them a new set of questions to answer. So what happened to them is the students in the group 1, they easily gave up because there were difficult questions as well as easy questions in the new set. But the group 1, they were just used to solve easy problems and they didn't have any difficult problems then. So now when they met with a difficult question, they easily gave up. But in contrast to that, in group 2, what happened? They have already met difficult questions earlier. They know that they have to try more, they have to put in more effort. So they tried, they kept on trying, and they didn't give up easily. That's what happened in Dweck's study. Did you understand that? Yes, Raina, did you understand? Elvina, Meghna and all, did you understand?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes. Okay.
Ma'am.
So that is about Dweck's study. Now, as you learn psychology, your views may change. So, the perspective about psychology on day 1 will be totally different when it's the end of the course. Okay, as you go through each and every psychological process, as you study all the chapters in this textbook, and as you read through more researches and scientific studies, you'll probably change at least some of the views that you already have right now. Okay, that's what we expect actually. Psychologists are different from astrologers, tantrics, palm readers, graphologists, etc. So all these sections, astrology, palm reading, graphology, all these comes under what? Pseudo-psychology. Please note pseudo-psychology, which means false psychology, which is not psychology. All these are a section away from psychology. Graphology, you know what graphology is? The study of handwritings. Please note that too. And psychologists explain phenomena based on scientific methods, systematic methods, and so on. So why did we discuss all these things? Popular notions about psychology, to understand that psychology is different from what? Common sense. Okay? Okay. So we'll just have a quick recap of what we studied today. Okay, we began with understanding mind and behavior. We took a statement from the textbook. It is true that mind cannot exist without brain, but mind is a separate entity. And we learned 3 cases here about the occipital lobe removal, about the phantom arm, about brain injury, right? And in all these cases, the brain was damaged or the body part was damaged, but the mind remained intact. Okay, then we saw the relationship between mind and the body. We learned about affective neuroscience, where we saw the positive visualization techniques, feeling positive emotions. The example was laughter therapy. And about Dean Ornish. Dean Ornish study was about the blocked arteries. They could visualize that the blood was flowing smoothly, which reduced the blockage in their arteries later on. Then we studied about the mental imagery, which is a technique used for phobias especially. And we studied what phobias are, how they are different from the normal fear. These are irrational fears. We saw the example of arachnophobia. Then we saw psychoneuroimmunology. We told the example of exam fever. Yes, don't you remember? Yes. I'm sure that you won't forget that example. So next topic was popular notions about psychology. In that whole section, we are mainly dealing with how psychology is different from common sense. Okay. So today's assignment is we have an activity on page number 6 of the textbook. Activity 1.1. There are 10 examples or 10 situations given in that. And what you have to do is mention 3 psychological processes involved in each situation. It's not necessary that you do all the 10, but pick any 3 from them. Any 3. It's your choice. Pick any 3 and write down how or what are the psychological processes involved in each situation. What do you think, or how much psychology is involved in it? Okay, any 3. Pick any 3 and send it over to me. If you can, send an audio because I want to hear you explain that. Okay. Okay, is that clear? Any doubts? Do you have any doubts in today's portions? If you have any doubts, please ask. Okay, are we all right? Can we meet tomorrow? Okay,
Yes,
then.
ma'am.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Thank you,
ma'am.
ma'am.